The first Olympic Games, born from a tapestry of myth and devotion, found their sacred home in Olympia, a verdant valley nestled in the western Peloponnese of ancient Greece. Long before the grand stadiums of Rome or the soaring spires of medieval cathedrals, this tranquil sanctuary, cradled between the Alpheos and Cladios rivers, became the beating heart of Hellenic unity and athletic prowess. It was a place where the earthly and the divine intertwined, where the whispers of gods mingled with the shouts of men, shaping a tradition that would echo through millennia. Imagine, if you will, the landscape around 776 BCE, the traditional date for the inaugural games. The air would have been thick with the scent of pine and olive trees, the distant murmur of the rivers a constant lullaby. Here, amidst groves dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods, and his divine consort Hera, a profound religious significance permeated every stone and every shadow. Olympia was not merely a sports arena. It was a Panhellenic sanctuary, a sacred precinct where city-states, often embroiled in bitter conflict, could lay down their arms and gather in shared reverence. The mythical origins of the games are as varied and colourful as the Greek pantheon itself, each tale weaving a thread into the rich fabric of their foundation. One popular legend credits Heracles, the mighty hero, with establishing the games after completing his legendary 12 labours. Weary but triumphant, he is said to have measured out the stadium himself, pacing the ground that would later witness countless feats of strength and speed. Another myth attributes their creation to Pelops, a figure whose story is steeped in both tragedy and divine favour. He supposedly won his bride, Hippodamia, in a chariot race against her father, King Oenomaus, a victory that, according to some accounts, led him to institute the games as a celebration and thanksgiving. Still other tales speak of Zeus himself, wrestling his father Cronus for supremacy on this very ground, an epic battle that prefigured the athletic contests to come. These stories, passed down through generations, imbued the site with an almost tangible sense of destiny, a feeling that Olympia was chosen by the gods themselves for this grand purpose. Yet, beyond the captivating myths, the historical reality of Olympia's early religious importance is undeniable. Archaeological evidence points to a continuous cult activity at the site dating back to the late Mycenaean period, around the 10th or 9th century BCE. Even before the grand temples were built, simple altars and offerings marked this as a hallowed ground. The earliest structures were modest, perhaps open-air altars where sacrifices were made to Zeus and other deities. The sanctuary was not just for athletic contests. It was a place of pilgrimage, healing, and prophecy, a spiritual nexus for the disparate Greek city-states. The most significant deity honoured at Olympia was without question Zeus. His temple, eventually one of the most magnificent structures in the ancient world, would house the colossal chryselephantine statue of Zeus, a wonder crafted by Phidias. But even in the early days, long before this monumental edifice, the presence of Zeus was felt everywhere. The sacred olive tree from which the victors' wreaths were cut was believed to have been planted by Heracles, a direct link to the design and a symbol of enduring life and triumph. The very act of competing in the games was an offering, a demonstration of human excellence dedicated to the gods. The origins of the Olympic Truce, or Equestrian, are particularly fascinating and underscore the religious nature of the games. This sacred truce, proclaimed before and during the games, allowed athletes and spectators safe passage through warring territories. It was a testament to the profound respect and reverence for the sanctuary and its divine patrons. While often portrayed as a purely practical measure to ensure attendance, its roots were deeply religious, a divine injunction against violence in the hallowed time of the Games. Historians still debate the precise enforcement mechanisms of the Equestrian. Was it truly universally respected, or were there instances of violation? While accounts suggest a general adherence, the practicalities of enforcing such a widespread peace among often hostile city-states remain a subject of scholarly discussion. It seems likely that the threat of divine wrath, coupled with the collective will of participating states, provided a powerful deterrent against transgression. The earliest games were likely far simpler than the elaborate spectacles of later centuries. The events were fewer, perhaps just a single foot race, the stadion, which gave its name to the stadium itself. This race, covering roughly 200 meters, was the ultimate test of raw speed. The victor of the stadion was considered the most important, and the games were named after him, a tradition that continued for centuries. Imagine the scene, a dusty track, thronged by eager spectators, the air thick with anticipation, as a handful of athletes, stripped bare, awaited the signal. The prize was not gold or silver, but a wreath of wild olive, a symbol of glory and divine favor. This simple crown, cut from the sacred tree, was a treasure beyond measure, conferring immense prestige upon the victor and his home city. One lesser-known detail about the early games is the role of the Hellenodikai, the judges. These esteemed officials, chosen from the local Elian population, were not merely referees. They were guardians of the sacred traditions and upholders of justice. They underwent rigorous training, sometimes for as long as 10 months, to learn the rules, discern fair play, and ensure the sanctity of the contests. Their decisions were final, and their authority was absolute, reflecting the deep respect for order and tradition that permeated the games. They wore purple robes, a color associated with royalty and divinity, further emphasizing their revered status. The evolution of the games from a local religious festival to a Panhellenic event was gradual, mirroring the growing cultural cohesion of the Greek world. As city-states like Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and Argos grew in power and influence, they increasingly sent their finest athletes to compete, not just for individual glory, but for the honor of their entire polis. The Games became a powerful symbol of Hellenic identity, a shared cultural experience that transcended political divisions. It was a place where Greeks could celebrate their common language, religion, and values, distinguishing themselves from the barbarians beyond their borders. The very landscape of Olympia itself played a crucial role in shaping the early games. The natural amphitheatre, formed by the surrounding hills, provided an ideal setting for spectators. The rivers offered a vital water source and a means of transportation for pilgrims. The fertile land supported the local population and provided resources for the growing sanctuary. The interplay between the natural environment and human endeavor created a unique and powerful atmosphere, a sense of place that was both earthly and ethereal. The early Olympic Games were exclusively for freeborn Greek men. Women were strictly forbidden from participating or even attending, with the exception of the priestess of Demeter Kamene, who had a designated seat. This exclusion of women, a reflection of the patriarchal society of the time, stands in stark contrast to the later development of the Heraian Games, a separate athletic festival for women held at Olympia in honor of Hera. The reasons for this strict segregation are complex, rooted in religious beliefs, social norms, and the nakedness of the male athletes. Some scholars suggest that the male body, in its unadorned strength, was seen as a perfect offering to the gods, a purity that might be compromised by the essence of women. The concept of arete, or excellence, was central to the Olympic ideal. It encompassed not just physical prowess, but also moral virtue, courage, and honor. To compete was to strive for arete, to push the limits of human potential in a way that glorified both oneself and the gods. The training of an athlete was not merely physical. It was a holistic discipline, cultivating both body and mind. The pursuit of victory was not about material gain, but about achieving a state of excellence that resonated with the divine. The first recorded Olympic victor, Korebos of Elis, a baker by trade, stands as a testament to the humble beginnings of this grand tradition. His victory in the Stadion race in 776 BCE marked a pivotal moment, providing a fixed point in the chronology of the games and allowing later historians to establish a continuous record. From this single, documented triumph, a legacy of athletic competition and cultural celebration would blossom, spreading its influence across the Greek world and, eventually, far beyond. The simple act of running a foot race in a sacred valley laid the groundwork for an institution that would endure for over 1,000 years, a beacon of human aspiration and divine reverence. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. The air, crisp and cool in the dawn light, carried the scent of olive groves and the distant bleating of sheep. It was a smell that had clung to the Peloponnese for millennia, a timeless aroma that spoke of sun-baked earth and ancient rhythms. Before the roar of the crowds, before the gleaming bodies of athletes, before the very idea of a unified Hellenic contest, the foundations of what would become the Olympic Games were laid in quiet reverence, steeped in local custom and the burgeoning worship of the gods. Long before the first official Olympiad in 776 BCE, the Valley of Olympia was already a sacred precinct, a place touched by myth and hallowed by generations. Early rituals here were not grand spectacles, but intimate offerings, whispered prayers, and simple athletic contests held as part of funerary rites or harvest festivals. Imagine small groups of villagers, perhaps from Pisa or Elis, gathering in the shade of ancient trees, their faces upturned to the sky as they offered libations to Zeus, the king of the gods, whose presence was felt in the rustling leaves and the distant rumble of thunder. These early gatherings were less about competition and more about communion, with the divine, with the land, and with each other. The origins of the games are shrouded in the mists of legend, with various myths vying for prominence. One popular tale credits Heracles, the mighty hero, with establishing the games after completing his 12 labours, perhaps as a celebration of his triumph or as a way to purify himself. Another legend attributes their creation to Pelops, a mythical king of Pisa, who, after winning a chariot race against King Oenomaus to claim the hand of his daughter Hippodamia, established the games in thanksgiving. These stories, passed down through generations, served to imbue the nascent contests with divine sanction and heroic precedent, elevating them beyond mere sport. Even in their earliest forms, these were not just physical exertions, they were acts of devotion, a way to honour the gods and heroes who shaped their world. The transition from localised religious festivals to a Panhellenic athletic event was gradual, spurred by the growing influence of the sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia. By the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, Olympia was becoming a significant religious center, attracting pilgrims from across the region. The increasing number of offerings, particularly votive bronze tripods and figurines, found at the site attest to its growing importance. These artifacts, often depicting warriors or athletes, hint at the martial and competitive spirit that was already deeply ingrained in Greek culture. It was within this evolving religious landscape that the idea of a more formalized, recurring athletic competition began to take root, a pivotal development, crucial to the very existence of the Games, was the establishment of the Chariot, or sacred truce. This was not merely a gentleman's agreement, but a solemn declaration enforced by the city-state of Elis, which controlled the sanctuary of Olympia. The truce decreed that all hostilities must cease for a period surrounding the Games, allowing athletes, spectators. When popular tales carried the Games' meaningful thinking, enforced by the city-state of Elis, which controlled the sanctuary of Olympia, and pilgrims' safe passage to and from Olympia. Imagine the heralds, known as spondophori, travelling across the rugged Greek landscape, carrying their olive branches, symbols of peace, into warring city-states. Their arrival would momentarily silence the clang of swords and the cries of battle, replacing them with the promise of shared humanity, even if only for a few weeks. This sacred truce was more than just a practical arrangement. It was a profound cultural statement. In a world perpetually fractured by intercity conflicts, the Chariot offered a glimpse of unity, a shared Hellenic identity that transcended local loyalties. It underscored the religious significance of the Games, positioning them as an act of piety that demanded universal respect. To violate the truce was not just a political offense, but a sacrilege, an affront to Zeus himself. Historians still debate the extent to which the truce was truly honored in every instance. While undoubtedly a powerful ideal, historical accounts suggest there were indeed violations, such as the Spartans attacking Elis in 420 BCE during a truce period, leading to their exclusion from the Games. Yet the ideal of the truce remained a cornerstone, a testament to the aspirational nature of the Games. The earliest, simplest athletic contests at Olympia were a far cry from the elaborate spectacles of later centuries. The very first recorded event, and for many Olympiads, the only event, was the Stadion race. This was a sprint, approximately 192 meters long, the length of the stadium itself. Picture the scene: a dusty track, perhaps just a cleared stretch of earth, marked by simple stone starting blocks. The athletes, likely local men from Elis and Pisa, would have stripped naked, their bodies glistening with olive oil, a practice that was both practical for hygiene and symbolic, emphasizing the beauty of the human form. The Stadion race was a test of raw speed and endurance, a direct challenge from one man to another. The victor, the Olympianikes, would not receive a gold medal or a laurel wreath initially, but perhaps a simple branch of wild olive, cut with a golden sickle from the sacred olive tree near the temple of Zeus. This modest prize, however, carried immense prestige. To be the fastest man in the Hellenic world, even if only for a single stadion length, was an honor that brought glory not just to the athlete, but to his family and his city-state. The name of the victor was recorded, often becoming the way that particular Olympiad was remembered. a practice that laid the groundwork for the systematic chronology of the Games. As the Games slowly evolved, other events were gradually introduced, reflecting the martial and agricultural rhythms of Greek life. The diaulos, a double stadion race, was added, demanding even greater stamina. Then came the dolisos, a long-distance race that could range from 7 to 24 stadia, testing the limits of human endurance under the scorching Greek sun. Imagine the rhythmic pounding of bare feet on the dry earth, the strained breathing of the runners, their bodies pushed to the brink as they circled the stadium again and again, cheered on by an ever-growing crowd. The introduction of wrestling, palais, and boxing, picks, brought a new dimension of physical prowess to the Games. These were brutal, no-holds-barred contests, often ending only when one combatant was rendered unconscious or conceded defeat. Unlike modern boxing, there were no rounds, no weight classes, and often no gloves, though fighters would sometimes wrap their hands with leather thongs to protect their knuckles. The sheer physicality and courage required for these events captivated the Greek imagination, embodying the arete, the excellence and virtue that they so admired. The pentathlon, introduced in 708 BCE, was a particularly significant addition. This multidisciplinary event, comprising the stadion race, wrestling, long jump, javelin throw, and discus throw, was designed to identify the most complete athlete, a man of balanced strength, agility, and skill. The discus and javelin throws were not just about distance, they were about form and grace, a harmonious blend of power and precision. The long jump, performed with the aid of halteres, stone or lead weights held in the hands, was a display of explosive power and coordination. The pentathlete, therefore, was seen as the epitome of Greek athletic ideal, not just a specialist, but a versatile master of many disciplines. The inclusion of equestrian events, such as chariot racing and horseback riding, marked a further expansion of the game's scope and appeal. These were events of immense spectacle and danger, requiring not only skilled charioteers and riders, but also well-bred horses and considerable wealth. The thunder of hooves, the creak of wooden chariots, the shouts of the drivers, and the roar of the crowd as chariots rounded the turning posts. These would have been electrifying moments, embodying the aristocratic splendor and competitive spirit of the age. The victor in these events was not the charioteer or rider, but the owner of the horses, a testament to the prestige and expense associated with these contests. The gradual expansion of events over the centuries reflected the evolving social and cultural landscape of ancient Greece. From a single sprint to a diverse program of races, combat sports, and equestrian contests, the games grew in complexity and grandeur. Yet, throughout these changes, the core principles remained: honoring the gods, celebrating human excellence, and fostering a sense of shared Hellenic identity. The sanctuary itself also underwent significant development. What began as a simple outdoor altar to Zeus gradually transformed into a magnificent complex of temples, treasuries, and athletic facilities. The first Temple of Hera, dating back to the 7th century BCE, stands as one of the earliest examples of monumental Greek architecture at Olympia. Its Doric columns, though now mostly ruins, once stood tall, bearing witness to countless rituals and offerings. Later, the Grand Temple of Zeus, completed in the 5th century BCE, would house the colossal chryselephantine statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, further cementing Olympia's status as a premier religious and cultural hub. The organization of the games, overseen by the Hellenodikai, judges from Elis, became increasingly sophisticated. These officials were responsible for everything from ensuring fair play and resolving disputes to training the athletes in the month leading up to the games. Imagine the rigorous training regimen. The athletes dedicating themselves entirely to their craft, living a disciplined life of diet and exercise under the watchful eyes of the Hellenodikai. The stakes were incredibly high. Victory brought immortal glory, while defeat, though not shameful, meant returning home without the coveted olive wreath. The early games, therefore, were a delicate balance of the sacred and the secular, the religious and the athletic. They were born from ancient rituals and local customs, gradually evolving into a sophisticated Panhellenic institution. The sacred truce provided the necessary framework for peace, allowing Greeks from disparate city-states to gather in a spirit of shared competition. And the simple athletic contests, from the raw speed of the stadion to the brutal intensity of wrestling, laid the groundwork for the enduring legacy of the Olympic Games, a legacy that continues to resonate thousands of years later. The dust of the ancient stadium, the whispers of the olive trees, and the echoes of triumphant shouts all speak of a time when sport was a pathway to the divine, a celebration of human potential, and a fleeting glimpse of unity in a fragmented world. The air, thick with the scent of pine and the distant bleating of sheep, shimmered under the fierce Peloponnesian sun. It was the summer of 776 BCE, a year that would echo through millennia, though its inhabitants could not have known the weight it would carry. In the sacred precinct of Olympia, nestled in the valley where the Alphios and Cladios rivers met, a new chapter was about to be etched into the annals of time. This was not the first time men had gathered here to test their strength and speed, for local contests had likely graced these grounds for centuries, a blur of athletic prowess and religious fervour, lost to the mists of unrecorded memory. But this year was different. This year, for the first time, a victory would be formally inscribed, a name remembered, a date fixed. This was to be the birth of the Olympic Games as we know them. The stage was simple, yet profound. No grand stadium with tiered seating as later generations would construct. Instead, a flat, earthen track, about 192 metres long, a stadion, stretched across the sacred ground, flanked by natural slopes, where spectators, a mix of local farmers, priests, and curious travellers, would gather. Imagine them, their faces upturned, eyes shaded against the glare, a murmur of anticipation rippling through the crowd. The air would have hummed with a primal energy, a blend of reverence for the gods and the raw excitement of competition. The olive groves, ancient witnesses to countless rituals, provided a verdant backdrop, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze, perhaps whispering secrets of the past to the eager present. The inaugural event was as fundamental as human movement itself, the stadion race, a sprint from one end of the track to the other. There were no elaborate opening ceremonies as we envision them today, no parades of nations or intricate torch relays. The focus was singular, pure, and deeply rooted in the Hellenic ideal of arete, excellence. The competitors, likely local men from the surrounding city-states, would have prepared with a disciplined regimen, their bodies honed by physical labour and dedicated training. They were not professional athletes in the modern sense, but men who embodied the Greek ideal of a sound mind in a sound body. Their physical prowess a testament to their virtue, and a gift offered to the gods. Among these first contenders, one name stands out, forever etched into the earliest records: Coroebus of Elis. He was not a king, nor a famed general, but a simple baker, a man whose hands kneaded dough by day, yet whose legs possessed an extraordinary swiftness. Picture him at the starting line, his muscles tensed, his gaze fixed on the distant finish. The ground beneath his bare feet would have been firm, perhaps slightly damp from an early morning dew, now warmed by the rising sun. The starting mechanism, if any existed beyond a simple signal, would have been rudimentary, perhaps a spoken command or the drop of a hand. The tension would have been palpable, a collective breath held, then released as the signal was given. Coroebus, with the grace and power of a deer, surged forward. His stride would have been long and purposeful, his body a blur of motion. The roar of the crowd, a primal sound, would have risen to meet him, urging him onward. The dust, kicked up by his powerful feet, would have swirled around him, a temporary halo of effort. In that brief, intense dash, perhaps no more than 20 seconds, Coroebus crossed the finish line first. He was the victor, the very first recorded Olympic champion. His prize, not a medal of gold or silver, but a simple wild olive wreath, known as the kotinos, cut from the sacred olive tree near the temple of Zeus, its branches a symbol of peace and purity. This humble wreath, placed upon his brow, elevated him to a status akin to a demigod, a hero in the eyes of his community, and, more importantly, in the eyes of the gods. This single foot race, so seemingly simple, was the seed from which a mighty tree would grow. It established the fundamental structure of the early games, a religious festival, a celebration of athletic excellence, and a period of sacred truce, the Equestrian, where all hostilities between warring city-states were suspended to allow safe passage for athletes and spectators. This truce, though often challenged, was a testament to the profound spiritual significance of the games. It was a brief, precious window of peace in a world often consumed by conflict. A time when Greeks could gather as a unified people, bound by shared culture and reverence for their deities. The first games were a stark contrast to the sprawling spectacle they would eventually become. There were no boxing matches, no wrestling, no chariot races, no pentathlon. It was just the stadion race, a pure test of speed. This singular focus speaks volumes about the early Greek ideal. Speed was admired, a reflection of divine swiftness and youthful vitality. It was also practical, essential for hunting, for warfare, for survival. The simplicity of the event allowed for a clear, unambiguous victor, a single hero to be celebrated. Historians still debate the precise origins and motivations behind the formalization of the games in 776 BCE. Was it a deliberate act by the city-state of Elis, which controlled Olympia, to establish its authority and religious significance? Or was it a more organic evolution, a natural progression from local funeral games and religious festivals? The truth likely lies in a complex interplay of these factors. The Eleans, as custodians of the sacred site, certainly had an interest in promoting its importance. The act of formally recording the victors, a practice attributed to the Elean priest-king Iphitos and the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus, provided a standardized chronology, a way to mark time and establish a shared cultural memory across the fragmented Greek world. This recording, the Olympic Register, became a foundational document for ancient Greek historians, a reliable timeline against which other events could be measured. The lesser-known detail here is the role of women in the early games. While married women were strictly forbidden from even attending the Olympic Games under penalty of death, young unmarried women were permitted to watch. This distinction is fascinating and hints at the complex social structures of ancient Greece. Furthermore, there were separate athletic contests for women, known as the Heraean Games, held every 4 years, also at Olympia, in honor of the goddess Hera. These games, featuring foot races for different age groups of maidens, demonstrate that athletic competition was not solely a male domain. Even if the grander stage of the Olympics was, the victors of the Heraean Games received olive wreaths and portions of a sacrificed cow, mirroring the male tradition in a uniquely female context. The site of Olympia itself was not just an athletic venue. It was a deeply sacred sanctuary. Before the first recorded games, it was already a place of immense religious significance, dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods. The early structures would have been relatively modest, perhaps a simple altar, a few small temples, and the natural running track. The atmosphere would have been imbued with a sense of awe and reverence, the air thick with the scent of incense and sacrificial offerings. The athletes, before their race, would have offered prayers and sacrifices, seeking divine favor, acknowledging that their strength and speed were ultimately gifts from the gods. This spiritual dimension was inseparable from the athletic one. The games were as much a religious festival as they were a sporting event. The enduring legacy of Coroebus's victory in 776 BCE is not just about a single race or a single man. It is about the establishment of a tradition, a rhythm that would beat for over 1,000 years. Every 4 years, the call would go out across the Greek world, inviting athletes to Olympia, promising a brief respite from war, and offering the chance for immortal glory. The simple act of recording that first victor transformed a local contest into a Panhellenic institution, a unifying force in a world of disparate city-states. It laid the groundwork for the expansion of events, the construction of magnificent temples and stadia, and the development of a complex system of training and competition that would captivate the ancient world. Imagine the quiet pride of Coroebus, the baker, returning to Elis with his wild olive wreath. He wasn't just a fast runner. He was a symbol, the first in a long line of champions whose names would be remembered, whose deeds would be celebrated in poetry and song. His victory, though modest in its immediate scope, ignited a flame that would burn brightly for centuries, illuminating the Greek ideal of human excellence and the profound connection between physical prowess and spiritual devotion. The dust of that first race, long settled, still whispers tales of aspiration and triumph, a timeless echo in the heart of the Peloponnese. The early Olympic Games, born from the simple foot race, were not static. Like a sapling reaching for the sun, they slowly but surely began to branch out, adding new challenges and dimensions that would define their enduring legacy. The spirit of competition, once confined to a single dash, yearned for greater expression, and the Greeks, ever keen on exploring the limits of human potential, were ready to provide it. The first significant expansion came with the introduction of the dialos, or double-stayed race, around 724 BCE, during the 14th Olympiad. Imagine the dust still settling from the stadion, the crowd's roar echoing in the valley, when suddenly a new challenge was announced. Instead of a single sprint down the length of the stadium, athletes would now turn at a post and race back, covering approximately 400 meters. This wasn't merely doubling the distance. It introduced a new element of strategy and endurance. The turn itself, often a tight maneuver around a campter or turning post, demanded agility and balance, a brief moment of controlled chaos in the midst of a full-speed sprint. The dialos was a test of sustained speed, of maintaining a blistering pace, not just once, but twice, pushing the body's anaerobic limits further. The winner of this inaugural dialos was Hipponos of Elis, a local hero whose name, though now largely forgotten, marked a pivotal moment in the game's evolution. His victory, celebrated with the same fervor as those who won the stadion, signaled that the Olympics were open to new forms of athletic prowess, a testament to the ever-evolving nature of human competition. Then, just 4 years later, in 720 BCE, the 15th Olympiad witnessed the birth of the Dolichos, the long-distance race. This was a true test of endurance, a grueling event that could span anywhere from 7 to 24 laps of the stadium, roughly 1,400 to 4,800 meters. The exact distance varied over time, adding a layer of historical ambiguity that scholars still debate. Was it always a fixed number of laps, or did it adapt to the specific layout of the track? Regardless, the Dolichos was a different beast entirely. It demanded not explosive power, but a steady, relentless rhythm, the ability to conserve energy, to push through the burning in the lungs and the ache in the muscles, lap after relentless lap. Spectators would have watched these athletes, their bodies glistening with sweat, their faces etched with determination, as they circled the track, their strides becoming heavier with each passing moment. The cheers for the Dolichos winner would have been different from those for the sprinters, a recognition of sheer grit and willpower as much as speed. The first victor in this monumental race was Akantos of Sparta, a name that resonates with the Spartan ideal of physical toughness and unwavering resolve. It's said that Spartan athletes often trained in the harsh conditions of their homeland, forging bodies and minds capable of enduring such extreme challenges. The Dolichos added a new dimension to the games, celebrating not just speed and strength, but also the profound human capacity for sustained effort and resilience. These early editions were more than just new events. They were a subtle but profound shift in the very character of the Olympic Games. They expanded the definition of an Olympic champion, moving beyond the singular burst of speed to embrace endurance and varied forms of athletic excellence. The Games were no longer just about who was fastest over a short distance, but who could sustain their effort, who could strategize over a longer course, and who possessed the all-around physical fortitude to excel in different disciplines. As the Games grew, so too did the ambition of the athletes. The idea of becoming a multi-event victor, a champion across different disciplines, began to emerge. The earliest known athlete to achieve this remarkable feat was Panhellenic of Athens, who in 696 BCE, during the 26th Olympiad, won both the stadion and the dialos. Imagine the atmosphere, the crowd already familiar with his speed from the stadion, now watching with bated breath as he lined up for the double stade. His victory in both events would have been a moment of awe, a demonstration of superior athleticism that set him apart. To win one event was prestigious. To win two was legendary, a testament to a truly exceptional athlete. This achievement would have cemented his place in Olympic history, whispered in tales long after the Games concluded. But Pantocles was just the beginning. The most celebrated of these early multi-event victors was Chionis of Sparta. His name, etched into the annals of Olympic history, represents a pinnacle of early athletic achievement. Chionis was a phenomenon. In 664 BCE, during the 33rd Olympiad, he repeated Pantocles' feat, winning both the stadion and the dialos. But he didn't stop there. He returned 4 years later, in 660 BCE, and incredibly won both races again. And then, for an unprecedented third time, in 656 BCE, during the 35th Olympiad, he claimed victory in both the stadion and the dialos. 3 consecutive Olympiads, 6 Olympic crowns in total, across 2 distinct events. This was an astonishing accomplishment, a feat that would have seemed almost superhuman to his contemporaries. Chionis' dominance raises fascinating questions about ancient training methods and athletic specialization. Was he simply a natural talent, blessed with extraordinary speed and endurance? Or did he employ specific training regimens that allowed him to excel in both the explosive sprint and the slightly longer dialos? While we lack detailed records of his training, his repeated victories suggest a combination of innate ability and disciplined preparation. His legend grew to such an extent that he was even credited with a triple jump of over 52 feet, a distance that modern athletes can only dream of. However, this particular claim is widely debated among scholars. Some believe it refers to a series of 3 separate jumps, while others suggest it might be an exaggeration or a misunderstanding of the event itself, perhaps involving a form of standing broad jump with weights. The ambiguity surrounding this incredible feat only adds to the mystique of Chionis, a figure whose athletic prowess pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. The rise of these multi-event champions like Pantocles and Chionis fundamentally changed the narrative of the Games. It was no longer enough to be merely fast. Now, athletes aspired to be versatile, to conquer multiple challenges. This shift fostered a deeper appreciation for the all-around athlete, a precursor to the later addition of events like the Pentathlon, which explicitly celebrated diverse skills. The pursuit of excellence in multiple disciplines became a new benchmark, elevating the status of the Games and inspiring future generations of competitors to push their own limits. The expansion of events also had a profound impact on the spectators. The addition of the dialos and dolichos meant more races, more excitement, and a longer spectacle. Imagine the buzz in the crowd as the dolichos runners began their grueling journey, the anticipation building with each lap, the collective gasp as a leader emerged or faltered. The variety of events kept the audience engaged, offering different kinds of drama and different heroes to cheer for. The Games were becoming a more complex and captivating affair, a true festival of athletic achievement that showcased the full spectrum of human physical capability. The gradual evolution of the Olympic program also reflects a deeper cultural understanding of competition and human potential. The Greeks revered the body and its capabilities, seeing athletic excellence as a reflection of divine favor and human virtue. Each new event was not just an arbitrary addition. It was a carefully considered expansion that tested different facets of physical and mental strength. The stadion tested raw speed, The dialos tested sustained speed and turning agility, and the dolikos tested endurance and strategic pacing. Together, they formed a more comprehensive measure of athletic superiority, a more complete picture of the ideal Greek athlete. These early expansions, though seemingly small in comparison to the later elaborate programs, laid the crucial groundwork for the enduring legacy of the Olympic Games. They established a precedent for innovation and adaptation, demonstrating that the Games were not rigidly fixed, but could evolve to reflect changing ideals of athleticism. The introduction of new events and the emergence of multi-event champions added layers of complexity and excitement, transforming a simple foot race into a multifaceted celebration of human endeavor. The dust of the stadium, once stirred by a single sprint, now rose to greet the sustained efforts of long-distance runners and the triumphant returns of champions who had conquered not just one, but multiple challenges. The whispers of the crowd, once focused on a single victor, now celebrated the versatility and enduring spirit of athletes like Chianis, whose legend would inspire generations to come. The Games were growing, stretching their limbs, preparing for even grander spectacles and more profound tests of human will. As the Olympic Games blossomed, their embrace of human endeavor expanded beyond the simple foot race, seeking to test a broader spectrum of skills, a more holistic ideal of athletic perfection. This ambition culminated in the introduction of the Pentathlon, a multifaceted event that would become a cornerstone of the ancient Games, demanding not just speed or strength, but a harmonious blend of them all. It arrived in 708 BC at the 18th Olympiad, a testament to the evolving philosophy of athletic excellence. The pentathlon was designed to identify the most versatile athlete, the one who can excel in 5 distinct disciplines: the discus throw, the javelin throw, the long jump, a foot race, and wrestling. Imagine the scene: the sun already high in the sky, glinting off oiled skin, the murmur of the crowd rising and falling with each attempt. The discus, a heavy bronze or stone plate, would spin from a powerful arm, arcing through the air, its flight a fleeting sculpture against the blue. Unlike modern discus throwing, the ancient technique likely involved a more fluid, less rotational motion, perhaps even a preliminary step or two, though the precise mechanics remain a subject of scholarly debate. Did they spin fully, or was it more of a winding, coiling release? The surviving artistic depictions, while vivid, leave room for interpretation, hinting at a dynamic form that prioritized grace and power. Then came the javelin, a lighter, slender spear, often fitted with a leather thong, called an ankyle, wrapped around its shaft. This thong, when held by the athlete and released at the moment of the throw, imparted a spin, stabilizing the javelin's flight and potentially increasing its distance. It was a subtle piece of technology, an elegant solution to a ballistic challenge, allowing the javelin to soar with a deadly precision that must have captivated onlookers. The goal was not merely distance, but accuracy too, as some sources suggest targets were occasionally used in practice, honing the hunter's eye within the athlete. The long jump was another event where ancient techniques differed significantly from our modern understanding. Athletes would often use halteres, stone or lead weights held in each hand. These weights swung forward during the takeoff and then backward upon landing, were believed to help propel the jumper further and to assist in maintaining balance. The jump itself was not a single leap, but rather a series of 5 continuous jumps. A fascinating detail that distinguishes it sharply from its modern counterpart. Picture the rhythmic pounding of feet, the swing of the weights, the athlete covering ground in a series of powerful bounds. A testament to explosive strength and coordination. This pentaplethora, or 5-fold leap, was a true spectacle of agility. The 4th event was a foot race, typically the stadion, the length of the stadium, approximately 200 meters. After the exertions of the throws and jumps, this sprint tested the pentathlete's remaining reserves of speed and stamina. It was a sharp burst of energy, a final demonstration of raw athletic power before the ultimate test. Finally, the pentathlon culminated in wrestling, a primal contest of strength, skill, and endurance. This was not the modern pin-based wrestling, but a form where victory was achieved by throwing an opponent to the ground 3 times. The atmosphere must have been electric. The grunts of effort, the thud of bodies, the roar of the crowd as one man finally gained the decisive advantage. The pentathlon, therefore, was a rigorous examination, a true trial of an athlete's all-around capabilities, celebrating the ideal of the well-rounded champion, the Kalo Kagathea, the beautiful and the good. But the games were not solely about this multifaceted challenge. They also saw the emergence of individual combat sports, raw and intense, pushing the boundaries of human strength and resilience. Wrestling, as a standalone event, predated the pentathlon, making its debut in 708 BC alongside it. It was a foundational sport, deeply rooted in ancient Greek culture, reflecting the martial training that was an integral part of a young man's education. The rules were relatively simple, yet the strategies were complex. Athletes, often covered in olive oil and dust, grappled in a designated area, their bodies a blur of muscle and sinew. There were no weight classes, adding another layer of challenge and unpredictability. A smaller, more agile wrestler might overcome a larger, stronger opponent through superior technique and endurance. The sheer physicality of it, the intimate struggle of man against man, must have been utterly compelling. Boxing, or pigmakeia, entered the Olympic program even earlier, in 688 BC. This was a brutal sport, far removed from the padded gloves and timed rounds of today. Boxers wrapped their hands and forearms with strips of leather called hymantes, which offered little padding but protected the knuckles and wrists. These early hymantes were soft, but over time they evolved into harder, more damaging coverings, sometimes even incorporating metal studs, transforming them into formidable weapons. The fights were long, often lasting until one contestant was knocked out, gave up, or was unable to continue. There were no rounds, no breaks, just a continuous, punishing exchange of blows under the scorching Greek sun. Imagine the sound, the heavy thud of leather on flesh, the sharp intake of breath, the gasps from the crowd. The faces of these ancient boxers, often depicted with flattened noses and cauliflower ears in surviving sculptures, tell a story of immense courage and enduring pain. One particularly famous anecdote tells of Damaxenos of Syracuse and Cregus of Epidamnus, who Greeks boxing and boxing grapples under the scorching Greek sun. Imagine the sound. The heavy thud of leather on flesh, the sharp intake of breath, and the gasps from the crowd. The faces of these ancient boxers, often depicted with flattened noses and cauliflower ears, tell a story of immense courage and enduring pain. One particularly famous anecdote tells of Damaxenos of Syracuse and Cregus of Epidamnus, who, another play for man, more pronounced, even earlier than peace, in a grueling Nemean Games boxing match, fought until Damaxenos, with a final desperate move, disemboweled Cregus with his fingers. While this extreme outcome might be an embellishment, it speaks to the ferocity and the stakes of these ancient contests. It was a sport for the truly hardened, a test of will as much as physical prowess, where victory often came at a terrible cost. The most extreme of the combat sports, and perhaps the most iconic, was the pancration, introduced in 648 BC. Its name, meaning all force or all powers, perfectly encapsulated its nature. It was a no-holds-barred martial art, a brutal combination of boxing and wrestling, with virtually no rules. Kicking, punching, grappling, joint locks, chokes, almost anything was permitted. The only forbidden acts were biting and gouging out an opponent's eyes. Even these rules were often loosely enforced in the heat of battle. The pancration was a spectacle of raw, unbridled aggression and extraordinary athleticism. Athletes trained rigorously, developing a terrifying repertoire of strikes and submissions. The fights were often decided on the ground, with contestants twisting and turning, seeking to gain a dominant position or force a submission. One legendary pancratiast, Equestrian of Figaleia, famously won his Olympic victory posthumously in 564 BC. As his opponent was choking him, Equestrian, in his dying breath, managed to dislocate his opponent's ankle, forcing a submission just as he succumbed to the choke. He was declared the winner, a grim testament to the indomitable spirit and the brutal nature of the pancration. His statue, erected in his hometown, served as a powerful reminder of his extraordinary, tragic triumph. The introduction of these combat sports and the pentathlon fundamentally altered the character of the Olympic Games. They moved beyond simple displays of speed and endurance to embrace a more complex, multifaceted ideal of athleticism. They also reflected the martial values of ancient Greek society, where physical prowess and the ability to fight were highly prized. Young men were expected to be skilled in wrestling and boxing, not just for sport, but to self-defense and military readiness. The Games, in a way, became a grand public display of the virtues cultivated in the gymnasia and wrestling schools across Greece. The training for these events was incredibly demanding. Athletes would spend years honing their skills, guided by experienced coaches. Their diets were carefully managed, their bodies sculpted through rigorous exercise. The gymnasium was not just a place for physical training, but also for intellectual discourse, reflecting the Greek ideal of a balanced mind and body. The oil that athletes applied to their bodies before competing served multiple purposes. It protected their skin from the sun, made them more difficult to grasp in wrestling, and was believed to enhance their physique, making their muscles gleam and ripple under the sunlight. After competing, they would scrape off the oil, sweat and dust with a curved bronze instrument called a strigil, a common practice depicted in countless artworks. The rise of these new events also brought new heroes to the fore. While the sprinters continued to be celebrated, the pentathletes and combatants became figures of immense admiration, their victories often seen as embodying the very essence of Greek masculinity and virtue. Their stories were told and retold, their statues erected in sacred groves and city squares, serving as enduring symbols of human potential and the pursuit of excellence. The addition of these diverse events ensured the Olympics remained dynamic and relevant, continually challenging athletes to push the boundaries of what was possible. It solidified the Games' reputation as the ultimate proving ground, a place where the human spirit, in all its strength and complexity, was celebrated and tested. The roar of the crowd, the clash of bodies, the arc of the discus, all these sounds and sights woven together into a tapestry of athletic glory, echoing through the sacred valley of Olympia, year after year, for centuries to come. These moments, these individual struggles and triumphs, were not just fleeting spectacles. They were etched into the collective memory of the Greek world, shaping their ideals of heroism and achievement. The dust, a fine golden powder, rose from the track, catching the afternoon sun as the horses thundered past. The roar of the crowd was a living, breathing entity, a wave that crashed against the stone tiers of the hippodrome, echoing off the distant hills. Chariot racing, perhaps more than any other event, embodied the sheer spectacle and aristocratic grandeur of the ancient games, a dazzling display of wealth, skill, and daring. These were not the simple foot races of the early Olympics, but elaborate, high-stakes contests that captivated entire cities. Imagine the scene: a vast, elongated arena, sometimes stretching over 600 meters in length, with a central barrier, the spina, adorned with statues and turning posts. Around this spina, teams of horses, usually 4, though sometimes 2 or even 10, would hurtle, their hooves pounding the earth, their breath steaming in the cooler air. The chariots themselves were light, often little more than a wooden platform with a low front, designed for speed and maneuverability rather than protection. The charioteers, standing upright, reins tightly wrapped around their bodies for control, were figures of immense celebrity, their names whispered with awe and admiration. The appeal of chariot racing, particularly at the Panhellenic Games like the Olympics, was deeply rooted in aristocratic culture. Owning and training racehorses was an incredibly expensive endeavour, a clear demonstration of immense wealth and status. It wasn't the charioteer who received the olive wreath in the Olympics, but the owner of the horses, the anastes. This tradition underscored the aristocratic nature of the event, where the glory belonged to the patron, not merely the performer. Dynasties and powerful families would invest fortunes in their stables, seeing victories as a direct reflection of their prestige and divine favour. For instance, the Macedonian king Philip II, father of Alexander the Great, famously won 3 Olympic chariot races in 356, 352, and 348 BCE. Victories that significantly enhanced his political standing and legitimacy among the Greek city-states. These triumphs were not just personal accolades, they were political statements, assertions of power and influence on the grandest stage. The danger was ever present, a thrilling undercurrent to the spectacle. The turns around the metae, the conical turning posts at each end of the spina, were particularly perilous. Chariots would often collide, wheels interlocking, horses stumbling, sending charioteers tumbling to the dust. The sheer speed, the close quarters, and the unpredictable nature of the animals made every race a gamble with life and limb. Yet, it was precisely this danger that fueled the excitement, drawing gasps and cheers from the tens of thousands of spectators. To emerge victorious from such a chaotic ballet of power and peril was to achieve a glory that transcended mere athletic prowess. Beyond the Olympic Games, chariot racing was a beloved spectacle across the Roman Empire, where it reached even greater heights of popularity and organization. The Roman Circus Maximus, for example, could hold over 150,000 spectators, dwarfing any Greek hippodrome. Here, the races were even more elaborate, with professional racing factions, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, commanding fanatical loyalties, much like modern sports teams. While the Greek games emphasized individual or aristocratic achievement, the Roman races became a mass spectacle, a form of popular entertainment intertwined with political power. Emperors often sponsored races, using them to curry favor with the populace, providing a thrilling distraction from the daily grind. But the equestrian events weren't limited to chariot racing. There were also races for single horses, ridden by jockeys, though these were less prestigious than the chariots. The Kales race, a bareback horse race, required immense skill and courage from the rider. Imagine the raw power of a galloping horse, the rider clinging on, guiding it with subtle shifts of weight and the pressure of their knees. No saddle or stirrups to aid them. These races, too, offered a glimpse into the Greeks' deep connection with horses, animals revered for their strength, speed, and beauty. A lesser-known aspect of these equestrian spectacles, particularly in the Roman context, was the desultor, a kind of ancient equestrian acrobat. These riders would leap from one galloping horse to another during a race, often performing stunts that would astound the crowd. While perhaps not a formal Olympic event, such displays speak to the broader culture of equestrian skill and entertainment that permeated the ancient world. It's a vivid reminder that the ancient games, while rooted in serious competition, also embraced elements of showmanship and theatricality. Historians still debate the exact origins of chariot racing as a competitive sport. While Homer's Iliad vividly describes chariot contests at the funeral games of Patroclus, suggesting an early tradition, archaeological evidence for formal hippodromes and structured races only truly solidifies later. Was it a natural evolution from military training, where chariots were essential instruments of war, or did it emerge independently as a form of aristocratic display? The truth likely lies in a confluence of these factors, with the martial origins gradually transforming into a more formalized athletic and entertainment spectacle. The transition from practical war machine to ceremonial racing vehicle is a fascinating trajectory, reflecting broader societal shifts. The training of these racehorses was an art in itself, passed down through generations. Breeders would select for speed, endurance, and temperament. The horses, often smaller and more agile than modern breeds, would undergo rigorous conditioning, their diets carefully managed, their muscles honed. The charioteers themselves were often slaves or professionals, highly skilled individuals who dedicated their lives to the craft. They wore distinct tunics, often color-coded to their factions in Roman times, and their helmets, though light, offered some protection. The bond between charioteer and horse, though not always romanticized in historical accounts, must have been profound, a partnership forged in the crucible of intense training and high-stakes competition. The atmosphere surrounding these races was electric. Before the main event, there would often be processions, elaborate parades featuring the competing chariots, horses adorned with plumes and precious metals, and the charioteers themselves, resplendent in their gear. The air would be thick with anticipation, the scent of horse sweat and dust, mingling with the aroma of roasted meats and wine from the vendors. Spectators would bet on their favourites, their shouts and cheers rising and falling with the fortunes of the race. The salpinx, a long straight trumpet, would sound, signaling the start, and then the gates would burst open, releasing the pent-up power of the horses onto the track. The sound alone must have been deafening. The thunder of hooves, the creak of wooden chariots, the sharp crack of whips, and the collective roar of thousands of voices. Imagine the chariots rounding the mete, the charioteers leaning precariously, almost defying gravity, their horses straining, muscles rippling under their sleek coats. The dust clouds would obscure parts of the track, adding to the drama and unpredictability. A race could be won or lost in a split second, a slight miscalculation, a moment of hesitation. The prestige of an Olympic victory in chariot racing was immense. The owner, often a prominent citizen or even a ruler, would commission odes from famous poets like Pindar to immortalize their triumph. These odes, rich in mythological allusions and grand pronouncements, celebrated not just the victory itself, but the lineage, wealth, and divine favor of the victor. They served as enduring monuments, ensuring that the glory of the win would resonate for generations. For instance, Pindar's odes, particularly the Pythian and Olympian odes, are replete with celebrations of equestrian victories, providing invaluable insights into the values and aspirations of the aristocratic elite. The charioteers, though not receiving the official olive wreath, were often rewarded handsomely by their patrons and became popular heroes in their own right. Their images might appear on coins or mosaics, their names etched into public memory. They were the rock stars of their age, their skills and bravery admired by all. Though many were of humble origins, their success in the arena could elevate them to a unique status, offering a path to fame and fortune otherwise inaccessible. The enduring fascination with chariot racing, from its early aristocratic roots in Greece to its mass appeal in the Roman Empire, speaks to a fundamental human attraction to speed, danger, and spectacle. It was a sport that combined raw power with exquisite skill, a test of both animal and human prowess. It was a canvas upon which wealth, ambition, and courage were painted in broad, dramatic strokes. And as the sun began to set over the hippodrome, casting long shadows across the track, the echoes of the thundering hooves and the roaring crowd would linger, a testament to the enduring power of these magnificent equestrian spectacles. Perhaps these races whispered stories to the stars, tales of glory and peril, that continue to resonate through the millennia, reminding us of the timeless allure of competition and the grandeur of human aspiration. The flickering torchlight, a symbol of divine fire, cast long, dancing shadows across the sacred precinct of Olympia. But beyond the athletic prowess and the fervent cheers, the Olympic Games held a profound significance that transcended mere sport. They were a beacon of unity, a fragile yet powerful force in a world often fractured by conflict and rivalry. At the heart of this unifying spirit lay the Equestrian, the sacred Truce, a remarkable institution that transformed the landscape of ancient Greece every 4 years. Imagine a land of fiercely independent city-states, each with its own laws, its own armies, and its own ambitions. Wars were frequent, borders fluid, and alliances shifting like desert sands. Yet for a brief, hallowed period surrounding the Olympic Games, a profound peace descended. The Equestrian, proclaimed by heralds known as spondophoroi, was not merely a cessation of hostilities, it was a sacred obligation, a divine injunction that guaranteed safe passage for all who wished to attend or participate in the Games. These heralds, adorned with olive branches, travelled far and wide, announcing the truce and ensuring its observance. Their journey was a testament to the reach and reverence for the Games, carrying the message from the sun-drenched shores of the Aegean to the rugged mountains of the Peloponnese, and even across the seas to distant colonies. The origins of the Equestrian are shrouded in the mists of legend, often attributed to the mythical Lycurgus of Sparta, or to Iphitos, king of Elis, in consultation with the oracle of Delphi. The story goes that Iphitos, troubled by the constant strife plaguing Greece, sought guidance from the Pythia. The oracle, in her wisdom, commanded him to restore the ancient Olympic Games and establish a sacred truce to protect them. This divine sanction elevated the Equestrian beyond a mere political agreement. It became an unbreakable vow, a sacred pact with the gods themselves. To violate the truce was not just an act of war, but an act of sacrilege, inviting divine wrath upon the offending city-state. The practical implications of the Equestrian were immense. For weeks, sometimes even months, before and after the Games, all military campaigns were suspended. Travelers, whether athletes, spectators, merchants, or priests, could journey to Olympia without fear of attack, ambush, or enslavement. Roads that were once perilous became pathways of peace. This period of safe passage allowed for an unprecedented mingling of diverse peoples from across the Hellenic world. Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, Argives, peoples often at odds on the battlefield, gathered together in a shared celebration of athletic excellence and religious devotion. The Equestrian wasn't just about protecting the athletes. It was about fostering a sense of Panhellenic identity, a shared Greekness that transcended local loyalties. Historians still debate the exact duration and enforcement mechanisms of the Equestrian. While the ideal was absolute peace, minor skirmishes or localized conflicts might still occur on the fringes, far from the sacred heart of Olympia. However, any direct aggression against those traveling to or from the Games, or any military action within the sacred territory of Elis, was met with severe penalties. The offending city-state could face exclusion from the Games, heavy fines, or even the wrath of the other Greek states. For instance, in 420 BCE, during the Peloponnesian War, Sparta was famously fined for attacking a town in the region of Elis during the truce, and their athletes were temporarily banned from competing. This incident underscores the seriousness with which the Equestrian was regarded, even amidst the bitterest of conflicts. It was a testament to the power of shared cultural values and religious belief that such a truce could be largely upheld for centuries. The Equestrian fostered an environment where cultural exchange flourished. Beyond the competitive arena, Olympia became a vibrant hub of intellectual and artistic activity. Philosophers like Socrates and Plato, historians like Herodotus and Thucydides, poets and artists would gather, sharing ideas, reciting their works, and displaying their creations. Imagine the bustling marketplace, alive with the chatter of different dialects, the aroma of roasted meats and fragrant incense, the vibrant colours of cloaks and tunics from every corner of the Greek world. In this crucible of shared experience, a common Greek identity was forged and reinforced. The Games provided a rare opportunity for Greeks to see themselves, not just as citizens of their individual city-states, but as members of a larger Hellenic civilization. The concept of Panhellenic unity, while often idealized, was a complex and multifaceted idea. It wasn't a political union in the modern sense, but rather a shared cultural and religious heritage that bound the disparate city-states together. The Olympic Games, along with the other Panhellenic Games at Delphi, Isthmia, and Nemea were the most powerful expressions of this unity. They provided a common calendar, a common set of values, and a common language of competition and worship. The Equestrian was the essential safeguard that allowed these expressions of unity to flourish, creating a temporary sanctuary from the perpetual cycle of conflict. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Equestrian was its demonstration of the human capacity for transcending division, even if only for a fleeting moment. It showed that despite political rivalries and territorial disputes, there was a deeper, shared humanity that could be appealed to. The olive wreath, the simple prize for Olympic victors, symbolized not only athletic achievement, but also the peace and goodwill that the Games represented. It was a powerful reminder that even in a world of constant struggle, there was a sacred space for shared celebration and mutual respect. The Equestrian was more than just a historical footnote. It was a testament to the ancient Greeks' understanding of the profound connection between peace, religion, and human flourishing. It allowed for the development of a unique cultural institution that endured for over a millennium, shaping the very fabric of Greek identity and leaving an indelible mark on the history of civilization. Even today, the spirit of the Olympic truce resonates, a timeless aspiration for a world where common ground can be found and shared humanity can triumph over division. The echoes of those ancient heralds proclaiming peace across the land still whisper through the ruins of Olympia, a gentle reminder of what is possible when humanity chooses unity over strife. The roar of the crowd, the glint of sweat on sun-bronzed skin, the thrill of victory. These were the rewards, the dazzling culmination of years of relentless discipline. But long before an athlete stepped onto the sacred ground of Olympia, their life was a tapestry woven with arduous training, precise dietary choices, and a social standing that set them apart. The journey to Olympic glory was not a sudden sprint, but a marathon of dedication, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance and self-mastery. Imagine a young man, perhaps from a wealthy family. For the pursuit of athletic excellence often demanded resources, time, a good diet, and freedom from manual labor. He would begin his training not in a grand stadium, but in a palestra, a wrestling school, or a gymnasium, a larger complex that served as both a training ground and a center for intellectual and social life. These were not mere gyms as we understand them today. They were hallowed spaces where mind and body were sculpted in tandem. Here, under the watchful eye of a pedotribes, a physical trainer, and a gymnases, a coach specializing in technique, the aspiring athlete would embark on a regimen that would seem daunting even by modern standards. Their days would often begin at dawn, with exercises designed to build strength and stamina. Running, jumping, wrestling, and discus throwing were practiced repeatedly, each movement refined until it became second nature. The halteres, stone or lead weights resembling dumbbells, were used not just for strength training, but also to enhance long jump distances, swung forward in a coordinated motion to propel the athlete further. Boxers and pancratiasts, the all-in wrestlers, would spar, their bodies coated in olive oil and dust, their faces grim with effort. The air in the palestra would be thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and the rich earth, punctuated by the rhythmic thud of feet, the grunt of exertion, and the sharp crack of a trainer's whip. For discipline was absolute. Beyond the physical, there was a strong emphasis on technique and strategy. The gymnases would not just push their students physically, but also instruct them in the finer points of their chosen sport, analyzing their form, correcting their posture, and teaching them how to conserve energy and exploit an opponent's weakness. For instance, in wrestling, the goal was not merely brute force, but leverage, balance, and a keen understanding of the human body's mechanics. Pancration, a brutal blend of boxing and wrestling, required not just strength but also cunning, as almost any maneuver was permitted, save for biting and gouging. The training was cyclical, often intensifying in the months leading up to the Games. For the final 10 months before the Olympics, athletes were expected to dedicate themselves entirely to their preparation, often living in special training camps near their hometowns, or even at Olympia itself, under the strict supervision of their trainers. This period was known as the periodos, a time of intense focus and isolation from the distractions of everyday life. The Olympic Truce, or Equestrian, declared a month before the Games, not only ensured safe passage for athletes and spectators, but also marked the beginning of this final, most rigorous phase of preparation, allowing athletes to travel to Elis, the region surrounding Olympia, for a mandatory month of final training. During this month, they would train at the gymnasium in Elis, under the watchful eyes of the Hellenodikai, the Olympic judges, who would assess their readiness and ensure they met the strict standards for participation. It was a period of both anticipation and immense pressure, as their entire year's efforts, and indeed their reputation, hinged on their performance. Diet was as crucial as training, though perhaps less scientifically understood than it is today. Early Olympic athletes, particularly those in endurance events, were thought to have consumed diets rich in cheese, figs, and bread. However, as the Games evolved and the demands on athletes increased, so too did their dietary practices. By the 6th century BCE, a shift occurred towards a more meat-centric diet, especially for wrestlers and boxers. The famous wrestler Milo of Croton, a legendary figure who won 6 Olympic titles in wrestling, was said to have consumed enormous quantities of meat daily. A story that, while likely exaggerated, reflects the prevailing belief that meat provided strength and bulk. Some accounts suggest he ate as much as 20 pounds of meat and bread, and drank 18 pints of wine in a single day. Though this is almost certainly a myth designed to emphasize his superhuman strength. More realistically, athletes would have focused on consuming protein-rich foods, along with grains and pulses, to fuel their intense training. They also understood the importance of hydration. Though they lacked modern knowledge of electrolytes, water and sometimes diluted wine would have been their primary beverages. Beyond food, other practices contributed to an athlete's well-being. Regular massages with olive oil were common, not just for relaxation, but also to keep muscles supple and to protect the skin from the sun and dust. They would often bathe in cold water, believed to be invigorating and to help with muscle recovery. Sleep was also paramount, allowing the body to repair and rebuild after strenuous activity. The holistic approach to training, encompassing physical exertion, diet, and recovery, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of athletic performance, even without the scientific tools we possess today. The social standing of Olympic athletes was complex and varied over time. In the earliest days, the Games were largely an aristocratic affair. Noblemen and wealthy citizens had the leisure and resources to dedicate themselves to athletic pursuits. Victory brought immense prestige, not just to the individual, but to their entire city-state. An Olympic victor was a hero, celebrated with poems, statues, and lavish feasts. They might receive lifelong benefits from their city, such as free meals at public expense, prime seats at festivals, and even tax exemptions. Their names were etched into history, their deeds recounted for generations. Pindar's odes, for instance, are timeless poetic tributes to Olympic victors, immortalizing their achievements and linking them to divine favor. The glory of an Olympic victory was seen as a sign of divine blessing, a manifestation of arete, excellence in its purest form. However, as the Games grew in popularity and professionalism, the social landscape began to shift. While amateurism was the official ideal, the reality was often different. By the Hellenistic and Roman periods, there were athletes who made a living from competing, traveling from one festival to another, earning prize money and accolades. These professional athletes, while celebrated, sometimes faced a degree of societal ambivalence. Some philosophers, like Euripides, criticized the excessive focus on athletics, arguing that it produced strong bodies but dull minds, and that resources could be better spent on other civic endeavors. He famously wrote, "Of all the countless evils throughout Hellas, none is worse than the race of athletes. What good do they do their country?" This sentiment, though perhaps a minority view, highlights a fascinating scholarly dispute. Were Olympic athletes truly amateur ideals, or were they, in essence, the first professional sports stars, driven by financial reward as much as by glory? Historians still debate the extent to which professionalism permeated the ancient games, with evidence suggesting a spectrum of motivations and compensation. While the official prizes were symbolic, an olive wreath, a palm branch, the unofficial rewards, from cash payments to lifetime provisions, were substantial enough to attract individuals who saw athletics as a viable career. The life of an athlete, particularly one aiming for Olympic glory, was not for the faint of heart. It demanded immense sacrifice, unwavering discipline, and a willingness to push the boundaries of human endurance. They lived under a strict code, often abstaining from certain pleasures, adhering to rigorous schedules, and enduring physical hardship. Their bodies were their temples, meticulously honed and cared for. They were figures of admiration, embodying the Greek ideal of physical perfection and competitive spirit. Consider the story of Theagenes of Thasos, a celebrated boxer and pancratiast from the 5th century BCE. Legend has it that as a young boy, he was so strong that he carried off a bronze statue from the marketplace, placing it in his own home. When caught, he was ordered to return it, which he did, earning him a reputation for both strength and good humor. He went on to win numerous victories, including an Olympic crown in boxing in 480 BCE and another in Pancratium in 476 BCE. His career spanned over 2 decades, during which he reportedly won 1,400 victories in various Panhellenic games. After his death, his fellow Thasians erected a statue of him, which was said to possess healing powers. This tale, while embellished, underscores the almost mythical status accorded to successful athletes, their lives becoming intertwined with legend and local folklore. The training methods, though lacking modern scientific understanding, were surprisingly effective. The concept of progressive overload, gradually increasing the intensity and volume of training, was implicitly understood. Periodization, the systematic variation of training to peak for competition, was also practiced, particularly in the final months leading up to the Games. The use of specialized trainers and coaches, the emphasis on technique, and the attention to diet and recovery all point to a sophisticated approach to athletic development. Yet despite the rigorous preparation, the element of chance always loomed. An injury, a moment of ill-timed fatigue, or simply facing a superior opponent could shatter years of dedication. The stakes were incredibly high, for defeat brought not just disappointment, but also a degree of shame. The victor was hailed as a god, the vanquished often forgotten. This stark contrast further fueled the intensity of their training and the ferocity of their competition. The ancient Olympic athlete, therefore, was more than just a competitor. They were a symbol. They embodied the ideals of agon, struggle, competition, and excellence. Their sculpted bodies, honed by years of effort, were seen as reflections of divine beauty and human potential. Their victories brought glory to their city, their family, and themselves, echoing through the ages. They were the living embodiment of a culture that celebrated strength, skill, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Forever etched into the annals of history, their echoes still resonating in the modern Olympic spirit. The dust, fine as powdered gold, shimmered in the afternoon sun, kicked up by thousands of sandals and bare feet that converged on Olympia. From every corner of the Hellenic world, and even from lands beyond, they came. Imagine the sheer scale of it. A gathering of perhaps 40 to 50,000 souls, all drawn to this sacred valley for the Olympic Games. This was no small provincial fair. It was a pilgrimage. A grand spectacle that dwarfed any other assembly in the ancient world. The air thrummed with a cacophony of languages and dialects, Doric, Ionic, Attic, Aetolian, mingling with the bleating of sacrificial animals, the shouts of vendors, and the excited chatter of spectators. Merchants, their stalls overflowing with wares, hawked everything from finely woven textiles and intricate pottery to exotic spices and fragrant oils. Fortune tellers, their eyes glittering with assumed wisdom, offered glimpses into the future for a small fee, while poets and philosophers held impromptu debates, their voices rising and falling in rhythmic cadences. The aroma of roasting meats mingled with the sweet scent of incense burning at the altars, creating a rich tapestry of smells that was uniquely Olympic. For many, this journey was the adventure of a lifetime, a chance to witness history unfold, to feel the pulse of the Hellenic spirit at its most vibrant. The crowds themselves were a spectacle. Men, women, and children, though the presence of married women was strictly forbidden within the sanctuary during the Games, creating a peculiar social dynamic. Unmarried women, however, were permitted, and some scholars suggest they may have even had their own separate athletic contests, the Heraean Games, dedicated to the goddess Hera. Though the exact relationship and timing of these events with the men's Olympics remain a subject of scholarly debate. Regardless, the atmosphere was overwhelmingly masculine, a celebration of male athletic prowess and civic pride. Tents and makeshift shelters sprang up like mushrooms across the plain, transforming the tranquil valley into a bustling metropolis for the duration of the festival. Families camped together, sharing stories and food, their laughter echoing under the vast Grecian sky. The religious ceremonies were an integral part of the Games, not mere prelude, but the very heart of the festival. The first day, and often parts of subsequent days, were dedicated to elaborate rituals and sacrifices. Imagine the procession. A slow, majestic river of priests, officials, and athletes, making its way to the great altar of Zeus. This altar was not a stone structure, but rather a colossal mound formed over centuries from the ashes of countless sacrificial victims. Each animal offered, oxen, sheep, goats, contributed to its ever-growing height, a testament to the piety and devotion of generations. The smoke from these sacrifices, thick and fragrant, would have curled upwards, a continuous offering to the Olympian gods, particularly to Zeus, the king of the gods, in whose honor the games were held. The most magnificent of these offerings was the hecatomb, the sacrifice of 100 oxen. Picture the scene: 100 magnificent beasts led to the altar, their hides gleaming in the sun. The priests, robed in white, performed the ancient rites, their voices chanting solemn prayers. The crackle of burning flesh, the rich aroma of roasting meat, and the deep, resonant sound of the sacrificial flutes would have filled the air. After the offering to the gods, the meat was divided, with portions given to the priests, the officials, and the victorious athletes. The rest was often distributed among the populace, a communal feast that bound everyone together in shared devotion and celebration. These ceremonies were not just about appeasing the gods. They were about reaffirming the collective identity of the Hellenes, a shared cultural and religious heritage that transcended the often fractious political landscape of the city-states. When the athletic contests finally began, the energy of the crowd reached a fever pitch. The stadium, a simple earthen track flanked by natural embankments, became a cauldron of emotion. There were no elaborate seating arrangements as we know them today. Spectators either stood or sat on the grassy slopes, jostling for the best vantage points. The roar of the crowd as a runner burst from the starting line, the collective gasp as a discus soared through the air, the thunderous applause for a victorious wrestler. These sounds would have been electrifying. The stadium could hold around 40,000 to 45,000 spectators, making it one of the largest public gathering spaces of its time. The events themselves were raw and visceral. The foot races, particularly the stadium, a sprint the length of the stadium, approximately 192 meters, were electrifying. Imagine the tension at the starting line. The athletes poised, muscles rippling, waiting for the trumpet's blast. The diaulos, a double stadium race, and the dolikos, a long-distance race of 7 to 24 stades, tested endurance and speed. The wrestlers, their bodies oiled and glistening, grappled in the dusty arena, their grunts and groans audible to the closest spectators. The boxers, their hands wrapped in leather thongs, delivered bone-jarring blows, their faces often disfigured by the brutal contest. The pentathlon, with its 5 disciplines, discus, javelin, long jump, stadium and wrestling, was considered the ultimate test of all-around athletic ability, and its winner was often hailed as the epitome of the Greek ideal. Perhaps one of the most visually stunning events was the Chariot race, held in the Hippodrome, a separate track located to the east of the stadium, though no trace of the Hippodrome remains today, swallowed by the shifting sands of the Alpheus River. We can imagine the spectacle. 4-horse chariots, light and agile, thundering around the track, their drivers, often slaves or hired professionals, clinging precariously to the reins. The dust clouds, the thunder of hooves, the shouts of the drivers, and the roar of the crowd would have been immense. The danger was palpable. Crashes were frequent and often fatal, adding a thrilling, if gruesome, element to the races. Yet the glory went not to the charioteer, but to the owner of the horses, often a wealthy aristocrat or even a city-state, for whom victory brought immense prestige. The lasting fame of Olympic champions was immense, bordering on the divine. To win at Olympia was to achieve a form of immortality. The victor, crowned with a simple olive wreath, a kotinos, cut from the sacred olive tree near the temple of Zeus, was not merely an athlete. He was a hero, a semi-divine figure. His name would be proclaimed throughout the stadium, echoing across the valley, and his achievement would be immortalized in song and sculpture. Upon returning to his home city, a victor was often greeted with a triumphal procession, sometimes even entering through a breach in the city walls, symbolizing that a city with such a hero needed no other defenses. He might be granted special privileges, like free meals for life. And his family would bask in the reflected glory for generations. Consider the legendary Milo of Croton, a wrestler of almost mythical strength who won 6 Olympic titles between 540 and 516 BCE. His feats of strength were recounted for centuries, becoming part of the popular imagination. He was said to carry a bull on his shoulders, to burst ropes bound around his head by simply inflating his veins, and to consume vast quantities of food. While some of these tales are undoubtedly exaggerated, they illustrate the almost superhuman status accorded to Olympic champions. Their bodies were often seen as paragons of physical perfection, inspiring sculptors to create idealized forms that captured the essence of athletic grace and power. The impact of these victories extended beyond personal fame. A victor at Olympia brought immense prestige to the champion's city-state. It was a source of civic pride, a demonstration of the city's strength, prosperity, and the quality of its citizens. Poets like Pindar were commissioned to compose victory odes, or epinitia, celebrating the athlete and his city, ensuring their memory would endure. These odes were not just poems, they were public monuments, sung at celebrations, solidifying the hero's place in history. The names of these champions were recorded in official lists, the Olympiadae, which became a crucial chronological framework for dating events in the ancient Greek world. For example, events were often dated by the Olympiad, providing a continuous 4-year cycle for historical record-keeping, a practice that continued for over a millennium. Even the simple olive wreath, a symbol of victory, held profound meaning. Unlike the lavish prizes offered at other Panhellenic games, like the Nemean Games, where the prize was a wreath of wild celery, or the Isthmian Games, which offered a pine wreath, the Olympic prize was of no material value. This emphasized the purity of the competition, the pursuit of excellence for its own sake, for honor and glory, rather than wealth. It underscored the sacred nature of the games, a contest not just of skill and strength, but of character and virtue. The olive tree itself was sacred to Athena, and its branches were believed to possess divine qualities. To wear the kotinos was to be touched by the gods, to embody the ideal of arete, excellence in all things. The crowds eventually dispersed, the tents were struck, and the valley of Olympia gradually returned to its tranquil state. But the echoes of the games lingered. The stories of the champions, the memories of the spectacle. And the renewed sense of Hellenic unity would be carried back to every corner of the Greek world. For 4 years, until the next Olympiad, the world would remember the triumphs and tragedies, the sweat and the glory that unfolded in that sacred precinct. The games were a powerful reminder of shared heritage, a common language of competition and reverence that bound together a diverse and often warring collection of city-states. And so, the cycle continued, every 4 years. For nearly 12 centuries, the Games were a constant, a fixed point in a world of flux, a testament to the enduring human desire for competition, celebration, and connection to the divine. The spirit of Olympia, infused with the cheers of the crowd, the prayers of the priests, and the triumphs of its heroes, became an indelible part of the ancient world's tapestry, a legacy that would one day inspire a new era to rekindle its flame. The sun, which had for so many centuries gilded the stadia and breathed life into the Olympic Games, began its slow, inevitable descent. The radiant glow of Hellenic independence and cultural purity that had defined Olympia for nearly a millennium started to dim, overshadowed by the ever-expanding shadow of Rome. The Roman Republic, and later the Empire, with its insatiable appetite for conquest and assimilation, gradually absorbed Greece into its vast dominion. This was not a sudden, violent rupture, but a gradual, almost imperceptible shift, like the slow erosion of a riverbank. The first significant turning point arrived in 146 BCE, when the Roman general Lucius Mummius Achaicus sacked Corinth, effectively ending Greek independence and bringing the entirety of Greece under Roman control as the province of Achaia. While the Romans initially professed a deep admiration for Greek culture and philosophy, this reverence rarely extended to the athletic traditions in their purest form. For the Romans, spectacles were often about grandiosity, military might, and brutal entertainment, a stark contrast to the Greek emphasis on individual excellence, spiritual devotion, and the pursuit of kallikraphia, the ideal of noble and good. Initially, the Olympic Games continued, albeit with a subtle, creeping transformation. Roman emperors, ever keen to project their power and benevolence, occasionally patronized the Games. Nero, that flamboyant and notoriously self-indulgent emperor, stands as a particularly infamous example. In 67 CE, he insisted on competing in the Olympic Games, a move that raised more than a few eyebrows even among his sycophantic courtiers. Not content with mere participation, Nero reportedly bribed officials to declare him the victor in every event he entered, including chariot racing, lyre playing, and even singing. Disciplines far removed from the traditional athletic contests. He even competed in a 10-horse chariot race, a category that had never existed before, and despite falling from his chariot, was still declared the winner. This blatant disregard for the spirit of fair competition and the integrity of the Games was a clear sign of their declining prestige and moral erosion. The very notion of an emperor competing, rather than merely overseeing, blurred the lines between athlete and patron, and further tainted the sacred nature of the contests. This episode, widely documented by Roman historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, marked a low point, a moment when the Olympic ideal was openly mocked and manipulated for personal vanity. Beyond the antics of emperors, the very nature of Roman society began to influence the Games. The professionalization of athletics, which had already begun in the later Hellenistic period, accelerated under Roman rule. Athletes became less like citizen warriors, competing for civic honor, and more like entertainers, often specializing in a single event and traveling from city to city for prize money. The focus shifted from the glory of the polis to personal gain and celebrity. While this offered new opportunities for some, it also diluted the communal and religious significance of the Games. The Roman fascination with gladiatorial contests and elaborate spectacles also cast a long shadow. While the Olympics never fully devolved into the blood sports of the Roman arena, the spirit of brutal competition and entertainment began to seep in. The purity of the Greek gymnasium, where athletes trained in the nude, emphasizing the beauty and strength of the human form, was viewed with some disdain by Roman sensibilities, which often preferred more armored and overtly combative displays. The economic landscape of Greece also played a role in the slow decline. As a Roman province, Greece's resources were often channeled towards Rome, and the lavish patronage that had once sustained the Games began to dwindle. The upkeep of the vast Olympic complex, with its temples, stadia, and training facilities, became an increasing burden. Earthquakes, a constant threat in the region, also took their toll, and the resources for constant repair and restoration were not always readily available. Historians still debate the precise extent to which Roman influence was a direct cause of the Games' decline, versus merely an accelerating factor in an already evolving tradition. Some argue that the seeds of professionalization and commercialization were already sown in the Hellenistic era, and Rome merely provided a new context for these trends to flourish. Others contend that the fundamental cultural clash between Greek ideals and Roman pragmatism, coupled with the loss of Greek political independence, inevitably sapped the Games of their original meaning and vitality. Regardless, the atmosphere at Olympia gradually shifted from one of fervent national pride and religious devotion to something more akin to a provincial sporting event, albeit one with a long and storied past. The rise of Christianity further complicated the fate of the Olympic Games. In the early centuries CE, as Christianity gained traction within the Roman Empire, its adherents often viewed the traditional pagan festivals, including the Olympics, with suspicion and outright hostility. The Games were inextricably linked to the worship of the Greek gods, particularly Zeus, to whom the great temple at Olympia was dedicated. The rituals, sacrifices, and naked athletic displays were seen as idolatrous and immoral by the burgeoning Christian communities. As Christianity transitioned from a persecuted sect to the official religion of the Roman Empire, the pressure to suppress pagan practices intensified. This shift began with Emperor Constantine the Great, who in the early 4th century CE legalized Christianity and began to favor it. His successors continued this policy, often with increasing zeal. The Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE, issued by Emperor Theodosius I, made Nicene Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire and explicitly condemned paganism. Theodosius I, a devout Christian, saw the pagan festivals as a direct challenge to the authority of the new faith. He issued a series of edicts aimed at stamping out pagan worship. In 391 CE, he prohibited all public pagan cults and closed temples. While these edicts did not specifically name the Olympic Games, their broad scope effectively targeted all religious festivals associated with the old gods. The Games, rooted in ancient Hellenic polytheism, could not survive in this new religious landscape. The final blow to the Olympic Games is generally attributed to Theodosius I in 393 CE. While there is no single definitive edict that explicitly states the Olympic Games are hereby abolished, the cumulative effect of his anti-pagan legislation made their continuation impossible. The financial support dried up, the religious context was forbidden, and the very concept of celebrating pagan deities was deemed heretical. The last recorded Olympic Games are believed to have taken place in 393 CE, marking the end of an astonishing 1,170-year run. The site of Olympia itself did not immediately vanish. The temples and stadia, once bustling with athletes and worshippers, gradually fell into disuse and disrepair. Earthquakes continued to plague the region, and the river Cladeos, a tributary of the Alpheos, periodically overflowed its banks, burying parts of the sacred precinct under layers of silt and mud. Later, in the 5th or 6th century CE, a devastating earthquake, possibly combined with a tsunami, completed the destruction, burying the site deep beneath the earth. The workshops of Phidias, the stadium, the temples and the treasuries, once vibrant centers of activity, were swallowed by the earth, their memory fading into legend. For over 1,000 years, the Olympic Games lay dormant, their legacy preserved only in the writings of ancient historians and poets. The once sacred grove became a forgotten field, the echoes of cheers replaced by the rustling of leaves and the murmur of the river. The flame that had burned for centuries at the altar of Zeus was extinguished, its light waiting for a new era to be rekindled. The story of the ancient Olympics, a testament to human endeavor, spiritual devotion, and the pursuit of excellence, had reached its natural conclusion, awaiting its rediscovery and rebirth in a distant future.